This is PM Agenda. Thanks for your company. With me now, the Finance Minister, Senator Mathias Cormann. Minister, thanks very much for your time. First of all, in increasing the debt limit, if Labor did this, you would have been outraged, wouldn't you?
Well, we've got to do this to fix Labor's mess. I mean, Wayne Swan, in May, when he delivered the budget, knew that he would reach the debt limit that is currently legislated by the end of the year. And in fact, the advice we've got now from Treasury is that we would reach the $300 billion legislated debt limit by 12 December. And if you look at the economic statement in the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook, I mean, it clearly indicates the gross debt heading for $400 billion over the forward estimates. And in fact, since then, of course, the budget position has deteriorated even further. The problem here is that Labor left behind a budget in very bad shape. Not only are the numbers bad that were in front of us in P4, the trend is very bad. The budget position continues to deteriorate. So what we have to do, and what we've started to do, and what the Commission of Audit will help us to do, is reverse the trend, repair the budget, put the budget back onto a believable pathway back to surplus.
It's a very broad scope that you've given them in these terms of reference for the Commission of Audit, headed by Tony Shepherd, the President of the Business Council. It's a broad scope, but it's also restricted in some sense because they're not allowed to look at the GST. You've said no increase in the rate or the base. You've also said you're not going to touch health or education. These are two of the biggest spending portfolios.
Well, firstly, I mean, we're not going to change the GST, but of course this is a review into the operations of government, focused on making sure that the operations of government are as efficient as possible, that taxpayers' money is spent as wisely as possible. It has got a very broad scope. It can look across all of the operations of government. Now, we're not going to cut spending to health and education, but we do want to make sure that we can spend more wisely, that we are going to spend achieving better outcomes for people across Australia. But what people across Australia are expecting from us, from the government, is that they receive better services delivered in a more efficient way. So the overall funding envelope is one thing. The quality of the spending within that funding envelope is, of course, a very important part of that equation as well. And in relation to health and education, we think that the Commission of Audit can do some very important work for us.
So when you're talking about these two phases of reports, one in January, one in March, but you're talking about cuts that could be fed into the May budget of next year?
Well, what we're focused on, there will be two phases. There will be an interim report by the end of January to the government, and there will be a final report by the end of March. Incidentally, in 1996, when the Howard government ran a similar process, that process took about 3 months from when it started to when it delivered its report to the government. The purpose is to receive recommendations which will feed into the 2014 budget process, which will help us to repair the budget mess that we've inherited from Labor.
And, well, if that's the case, and with this increase in the debt limit, why didn't you release the mid-year economic update before you did this, so we all know the state of the books as they stand?
Well, we are going through a calm, methodical and orderly process. We know that the Labor Party has been out there jumping up and down, wanting us to deal with things in the sort of panicked, disjointed and chaotic fashion that they used to do in government. We don't think that that led to very good outcomes. Our process is going to be very purposeful. It's going to be very methodical. So what we did, of course, since the election, we've started a very thorough review of grants spending across government. We're scrutinising grant spending across government to make sure there's no waste, no double-ups, and that spending aligns with the priorities of government. We're now announcing today the Commission of Audit. We're, of course, also working on the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook, which will be released before Christmas, and we're also putting in train all of the processes in the lead-up to the 2014-15 budget.
You're not talking Christmas Eve or something, though? We will have time to scrutinize it while people are still focused on it?
I can promise you we'll not be releasing the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook on Christmas Eve.
Let's look at some of the other specific elements of this review. The consolidation of agencies and boards and other looks at the effectiveness of government machinery. Do you still stand by the commitment that job losses in the public service will be only through attrition?
Well, there's a whole range of different things. Firstly, right now, there are redundancies happening across the public service as a result of decisions that Labor made in government in its recent budgets and budget updates. Secondly, yes, we did take a policy to the last election, which we're committed to and which we will implement, which is to reduce the size of the public service through natural attrition by 12,000. Now, beyond that, of course, people across Australia expect us to spend their money wisely and to make sure that we can shift as much of the limited resources that are available to government away from pure administration to service delivery as possible. When the objective has got to be that the resources that are made available to government by taxpayers are targeted at delivering better outcomes for people and not just ever-increasing bureaucracy.
Well, that's one of the things that's been ever-increasing in recent years has been middle-class welfare. It's been attempts to rein it in by the Labor government, but you've asked this commission to look at the rising cost of social spending. Is that something that does need to be reined in?
Well, we think
part of one of those structural shifts that you're talking about.
Well, we think it's very important for a Commission of Audit to take a strategic look at the operations of the whole government, to provide a report to government, which government then will consider. What we've said is that, obviously, in terms of responding to the recommendations that will come our way, we will respond to it in a way that is consistent with the commitments that we took to the last election. We will not be implementing recommendations that will be inconsistent with the commitments.
No, but not in the short term, but it could provide you with the agenda for the second term, and middle-class welfare could be one of those things, or you'd think almost inevitably that you'd have to rein in.
The terms of reference that we've released today for the Commission of Audit are very explicit. They've got a very important task. The objective, of course, is to make sure that we can put the budget on a sustainable medium to long-term footing. We've got serious challenges, one because of the state of the budget that we inherited from Labor, but two also because there are some fiscal pressures on the spending side, in particular, for example, in relation to the ageing of the population. So there is some important work to be done. We want the Commission of Audit to do its work without any inhibitions from government, but of course, ultimately, government will make decisions on what we think is sensible to implement and what we think is not.
Senator Cormann, appreciate your time.
Always good to be here.
A quick break on PM Agenda. We'll be right back. Stay with us.